Dan Edwards, a solution architect with Crow, and I am happy to be presenting at DynamicsCon. Thank you so much for the DynamicsCon team including me. I'm excited to get started. So let's start talking about my session. So my session today is using Power Automate with Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain, or Finance and Operations, as many of us still call it. You'll probably even see me use it both ways in my demo today. So as I mentioned, I'm a senior manager and a solution architect with Crow. Been implementing these systems for over 25 years. I refuse to make that number any higher at this point. We're going to leave it at 25 years. And I specialize in finance and operations solutions, and I've spent a lot of time with the Power Platform. So I'm excited to show you some of the things we're doing with our clients and just hopefully give you some ideas today. So that's really the whole crux of this presentation. Is you may already know Power Automate connects with D365 F&O, but why? How would I use that? So I've got some examples today that we're going to look at building out, whether that's for a new vendor, a new customer, maybe even a new journal entry way that you could use in the system. So our agenda, we're going to start off with just a quick intro of what is Power Automate. And then we'll talk about why Power Automate instead of Dynamics Workflow. And then we'll get into building some of those applications. Now, as I'm presenting, feel free to put in your questions in the live chat. We'll be monitoring that and make sure to get answers to all of those as we're going through the presentation. So let me jump into, what is Power Automate? So Power Automate is part of the Power Platform. It goes along with Power Apps, Power BI, Power Virtual Agent, and then Power Automate. And it's a service that automates your workflow and really allows you to integrate between different applications. And as you can see there in my screenshot, it comes with over 597 services built in. So whether I want to connect to finance and operations, whether I want to connect to Dataverse, OneDrive, Excel, any of numerous systems, you're going to be able to use that with Power Automate. But again, why Power Automate? Especially for workflow, I already have workflow in Dynamics 365. Well, Dynamics 365 has limited abilities around workflow, so you can really extend much more of your workflow with Power Automate. Plus, as we just talked about, there's many different connections. So not only am I connecting to the D365 environment, but I may be triggering or working with other systems. Matter of fact, you'll see today in the demo how I can work with OneDrive and how I can work with Teams as I'm moving through with Power Automate. And it really gives us the ability to automate a lot of repetitive tasks and actions. So how do I get in and get started? Well, you probably noticed when you're working in Dynamics, if you're up on your ribbon bar, you may see Power Automate, and you'll see it talks about see your flows or create a flow. So that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to create some flows using Power Automate. Now, how do I connect Dynamics 365 Finance with Power Automate? Well, there's a couple ways you can do that. There is a connector specifically for finance and operations, and it uses the data entities for you to connect. You can also use the Dataverse connector if you've turned on virtual entities. So I'm not going to get real deep into virtual entities today, but virtual entities are a standard component that integrate the Power Platform and Dataverse with finance and operations. So if your IT team or your partner has turned on those virtual entities, you can use those with Power Automate. It's actually a little easier than using the finance and operations connector. In my slides, I'm using the finance and operations connector, and I joke, I think I have about 80 slides. We've got a short session here of about 45 minutes. So 80 slides in that time. The reason I have those slides is to share with you. So you'll be able to look at my slide deck and hopefully follow what I built and build that yourself. I'm not going to necessarily spend a lot of time on each slide because I'm going to try and build some of these for you as part of the presentation. So enough said, let's get started building some examples. So let's start with some things you want to turn on in D365 if you're going to do this. So one of the ways I'm going to trigger Power Automate is by using the alert system inside of D365. So you'll want to check inside of D365 to make sure you have the batch job running for your alerts. So you can simply follow the path here, system administration, inquiries, batch jobs, and then check to make sure this batch job is waiting. If it's not waiting, you'll need to go in and turn that batch job on. You're probably going to want to set it to recurrence of every couple of minutes so that you're not having to wait a long time for these alerts to get triggered. Now, again, this is only if it wasn't running from the prior slide. So now that I have that turned on, let's get into some examples. So my first example is dealing with a new customer. So this is something, as a solution architect, I work with many customers, and they seem, I think sometimes they just want to trip me up. And how could I do this in Dynamics? So the question they asked is, we have new customers being added to Dynamics all the time, but we don't want them to have any activity until the credit team has had a chance to review them and set up a credit limit. So they want their salespeople to be able to go in and add into Dynamics, but they don't trust their salespeople not to use the customer until the customer's been approved. So they asked how we could tackle this. I thought Power Automate would be a great way to do that. So the first thing you do is you start a custom alert. So I need to know when a new customer has been added. So let me jump over to D365 real quick, and I'm just going to go in and take a look at all customers. And so here in my all customers, I'm just going to simply come up here to the ribbon bar, to the options, and I'm going to go ahead and say I want to create a custom alert. So I don't know if any of you have ever created these alerts before, but we'll create that custom alert. So now here on the alert screen, all I simply have to do is scroll way down to the bottom and make sure to say send externally. I don't need to have an email recipient or anything like that. I just want to go ahead and send this, and I need to know what the rule number is, in this case, 000286. Now, in this case, I'm going to cancel because I already have that rule created. So if I come in here to manage my alerts, I can see I already have a rule created here for my customers. So now that I have that rule, let's jump back over. And you'll see the next thing is you're going to need a schema from that rule. So what this is doing is when that rule runs, it gathers some information from that new customer that just got added. So you're going to actually be able to download a text file that we're going to use in Power Automate. This will be part of your JSON. So again, this is the map. You can go ahead and download this. It is the same for every one of your alerts. So later I'm going to do a vendor alert. I can use the same schema. So you don't have to continue to download this for every alert. Just download it once and save it, so you'll be able to reuse it. So now we're ready to get into flow and start building our flow. So there are different types of flows you can use. In this case, it's going to be an automated flow. So I'm going to just kind of pop through some slides here to show you what we'll build out, and then I'll jump back into the actual live system and we'll look at one that I've built. So once we start that automated flow, it wants a trigger. So again, this is where I'm using the F&O connector to say when a business event occurs and it's an alert, I want to trigger this flow to start. Then I'm going to bring in that business event JSON file. And then that's where the rule number comes in. So my rule number is equal to a certain number, because this trigger is going to run every time an alert processes, but I only want it to do things if it's the customer rule. So if we've got 10 or 15 alerts, they may all kick off this trigger, but we don't want them to run. Now, this is where it's better to use the virtual entities. So when we get into the live demo, I'll show you a compare and contrast. I do it this way because a lot of clients have not turned on virtual entities. But again, I recommend you talk to your IT team, or there may even be another session here at DynamicsCon to talk about virtual entities. If you can turn those on, I'll show you the difference, but then I don't need a condition. So now I simply am going to tell Power Automate what to do. So it's going to see what customer you just added. It's going to update that customer by putting them on credit hold, and then it's going to send an email to the credit team. So I've got, as I mentioned, a lot of information in the slides here, but I have a limited amount of time. So versus jumping through all these slides, because you guys are going to be able to download the deck and read that, I'm going to jump into my demo again, and let's actually just look at the live system. So if you're not sure how to get to Power Automate, I'm going to go back to that customer list, and you'll notice I can get to it just like we created the alerts here. I'm going to go ahead and say, see your flows, and that's going to launch another browser tab for me and take me right into Power Automate. So now I can see all the different flows that I have. So let's go ahead and take a look at the flow we were just talking about for a customer being billed. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, let's start actually at the beginning if none of you have ever created a flow before. So let's ignore these ones I built, and I'm just going to say new flow. And again, this is where there's many different types of flows in Power Automate. We could spend several hours training on how to use Power Automate. But in this case, it's just going to be an automated cloud flow. And that automated cloud flow means Power Automate is listening for something to happen. So I'm just going to call this my DynamicsCon new customer. And then you can look for what to listen, or what is the trigger, what will start this flow. So I know I want to start it from a business event in finance and operations. So I just searched on FIN, and there's when a business event occurs. Now, if I was going with Dataverse, I can do it here in Dataverse. And the reason I like this is because it's just listening to the table or the entity in Dataverse for when a row is added. So those are the two different ways that I could start this flow. So again, we'll start in FinOps. I'm going to say create. And then when you're connected, it wants to know what instance of Dynamics. So you may have more than one running. And then we're listening to the alerts. And then what business event do you want to do? So we're looking for an alert rule change. And then you can limit this to only look for certain legal entities. So that's what I'll do here. So now it's listening to the alerts, and then I would start adding my new steps. So the steps are the process, this workflow that Power Automate is going to go through. So I'm going to step back and just checking my time there, see how we're doing. I'm going to take a look at what I actually already built out, because there's a few steps here. So as you notice, if I open up my existing one, we have the when business event occurs, and then I have that JSON file. So as I mentioned in the slide deck, you simply paste in that file you downloaded from finance and operations from D365. Once I've pasted that in, now I have the condition. So there's my rule number. The no side's really easy of the condition. I don't need it to do anything. I just need it to stop. And then on the yes side, I'm going to go ahead and go out and get the customer record. So this is a key here. You see these object IDs. I'm using dynamic content. Don't confuse that with dynamics content. Dynamic as it changes based on what's going on in the flow. But you'll see when I click on that dynamic content, all this is coming from the parse JSON step. up above, this step right here, parse JSON. And these are the fields that Dynamics 365 has sent over in the rule. So in order to find a customer, I need to know the data area ID and the customer number. Well, the customer number comes over as key value 1. So to bring that key value 1 in, I'm using dynamic content. I just go ahead and select it. Now, it may be hard to see on the screen. There is a comma between those. So it's data area ID, comma, key value. And then once I have that information, I can, again, update a record. So how we're adding these steps, you'll see here, I can add an action. I go out and find where's my action. So it's part of the FinOps connector. I want to update a record. And then the key is understanding your data entities. So I got to pick that I want Dynamics first. And then what do I want to update based on? So I'm using the customer, can't type, customers V3. Ignore the little error message that comes up. It does that while it's searching. So now that comes up, I can start filling in the changes I want to make. So you'll notice it wants to know what the unique identifier is of this customer. So again, it's going to be in my slide deck, but it's the company and the customer account number. And the reason I had to go out and find a customer first is because I need the customer group and the currency ID to make an update. So finally, and I'm spending the most time on this one since it's the first one, you'll notice as I expand this, here's every field that relates to a customer. And so I can scroll through here, and you notice as I scroll through, here's invoicing and delivery on hold, all. Okay, so I can choose what do I want to do. So I said I want to update this record to put this customer on hold. So I can do other changes. So if I wanted to put time zone information or responsible employee, anything like that, I can update this record. So now I'm going to step back and let's see if this thing works. So actually, before I do that, I'm going to look at the other way I built this out real quick. So this version is actually using dataverse. Now you notice with this version, it's a lot less steps. This again is why I recommend those virtual entities. Wasn't using those for quite a while, but as I've gotten more into the dataverse, I really like working with those virtual entities. So what's nice here, I'm connecting to dataverse instead of FinOps, and I just say, I want to know when a change, an added, you notice you can kick a flow off if you modified a customer as well. But I don't even need to create that rule back in Dynamics 365 F&O side. I just sit here and say, whenever a line is added to the customer V3 table, and that's the key, is you've got to have that virtual entity table turned on. They're not turned on by default. Whenever a row is added there, then I want to update that same row. So I go get the row number that was just updated, and you can go out here and find, what the key field is. So it's this customer 3, and kind of scrolling down here so you can see unique identifier for the entity. That lets me know that's the one I need to look it up on. And then just like I did before, I can change statuses. I can put a customer on hold, anything like that. So one thing I do, I'll give you a little tip. I use my find in my browser to find some of the fields I'm looking for. So that's how I was able to jump down to hold real quick. Invoicing and delivery on hold, and I choose all. So one other thing I did with this version is instead of sending an email, I'm posting a Teams chat. So I can actually have this just go to the Teams channel and let people know that there's a new customer. So let's see this run in action. So we'll use the one that's going to show in the team. So I'm going to come in here into D365, and I'm just going to put on a sample customer. So my customer account, just AA001 and Dynamics Con. Which one of our customer groups are they going to be? Let's say they'll be a major customer, and I'm here in Huntington Beach, so I know my zip code. I'm going to put that in, and I'm going to save that new customer. So that new customer is being saved to D365, but I didn't put the customer on hold. I didn't tag it as a new customer. I didn't do anything. So now the new customer's added. Let's go back. Well, let me scroll down real quick. You'll see account status is blank, okay? And they're not on hold, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my flow, and you'll notice you can come out here and you can see if flows are running. So this flow is running right now. So you can actually even jump in here and see how is it running. So let me launch that. So it tells me my flows are running. So it's been triggered. It knows that a row's been added, and it just finished. It just updated that row, and it just posted a message in the chat. So I happen to have that team open. So if I switch my browser over here, you'll see a team, new customer has been added for Dynamics Con. I've even put a link in the message in the team to open up D365 to the hold table. So that's just an example of what you can do. So sure enough, there's the Dynamics Con customer on hold. I scroll down here, you can see they're on hold and the status has been changed to new and new. So that kind of did a full walkthrough of that one to give you a good understanding. Again, as we're going through here, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat and I'll answer those. So here's the detail. I'm posting that message to the team as well. So let's talk about another example real quick. We'll go through this one a little quicker, but this is a vendor. And so I'm just kind of switching sides, new customer. Now I'm doing a new vendor. Well, with the vendor, I actually need to send the vendor information. So I need to send them a blank W-9 and ask them to complete this. So I want to integrate with Outlook. So I started the same way, downloading the schema, the automated flow. So all of that is the same. So it's just like what we just built out, but what you're going to notice here is there's some new conditions. So now I'm going to start connecting to OneDrive, and I actually have a blank W-9 in my OneDrive, and then I'm going to send an email to that vendor. I can send an email back to the AP manager. I can post this on Teams, anything like that. So again, we've got quite a few slides here to show you how to build this out. But again, let's kind of jump forward, and I'm going to jump back into D365 and back into Power Automate. So if we go back to Power Automate and look at our flows, again, I'm going to first look at the flow built on finance and operations. And again, it starts the same. It's got the condition. The key here is get the metadata from OneDrive. So how did I start all of this? I've got a tab up here for my OneDrive. Out here on my OneDrive, I went out to the IRS site and got a W-9 tax form here in the US. And I just put that PDF here in my OneDrive. So I mentioned Power Automate can connect to more than Dynamics. So it can connect, come back in here, it can connect to my OneDrive. So I just simply clicked on the little browser here and start searching my way out my OneDrive. There's the W-9. So I need to get the metadata information, and then there's another connector called Get File Content. And then for that, I just need to get I can either put the ID in or I can just go get the file again. So it depends if I want to use dynamic content. Then a new connector we're using on this one is email. So here, again, I can send an email out, and I'm getting the email record from Dynamics 365. So just like before, I started with get a record. So I went out there and found the vendor information, and I'm then able to go in and use that email address from Dynamics to be my send email. And if I extend this, one of the things I've noticed with all these connectors, you always see these show advanced options. So that's where a lot of the real meat is. So when I do show advanced options on send an email, that's where I'm able to attach the document. So I attach the name, W9, and then the body, and then I can send an updated record. So I'm updating and putting the vendor on hold. So that's kind of the final steps there. So again, let's jump back here. I can look at this built in the Power Apps version as well. So again, less steps. So virtual entities, you're going to hear me continue to say that. So again, I'm able to send the email request. I've got the file attached there, and then I'm going to post this to Teams. So let me jump back over, get out of that flow. Let me jump back over to finance and operations and get into my vendors. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new vendor. I'm just going to put in a vendor number. We'll do Dynamics Con again and put in my group number. And then I'm going to come down here and add a contact because I've got to have somebody to send the email to. And I'm going to send it to myself so we can see if it arrives, and make sure to mark that primary and save. So that is all entered in the system. If I come back here and take a look at this, it should kick off here momentarily. Oops, it looks like it failed, which is actually a good example. Okay, so it got all the way through and it failed because I didn't have the email address in. So I have noticed this issue. So I'm going to leave this in, and so you guys see this, is there's some timing, the way Dynamics adds records to the dataverse and through that entity. So probably my best bet is to put a pause in here so that I can save the email address before it tries to send it. But just wanted to show you how that works. So we're not going to troubleshoot this, but this is good to have in mind how to troubleshoot these flows. So you notice I can look at this flow and see the information that came from that record being added. And if I scroll down here, I can probably find that the vendor address was not in yet when the flow tried to kick off. So it runs very quick in the Dataverse. So again, if I scroll through here, you see several blank fields. So let's go ahead and keep going. Keep this as an example. You can see I have tested it before, and it definitely does work. But I want to move on to my final demo around a journal entry. Now, you may think, what do I need with Excel journal entries? I can use the Dynamics 365 add-in and do Excel journal entries. Well, that's great, but I find sometimes journal entries are even created by people that don't have a Dynamics license. So what I was challenged with from a client is they wanted to put everything into Excel, route it through a bunch of approval processes, and then have it go into Dynamics if it was approved, and they wanted to store all the Excel spreadsheets. So again, I'm going to use several different pieces. So I'm going to use Excel, I'm going to use OneDrive, I'm going to use the approval capabilities inside of Power Automate, and I'm going to use Outlook to update and notify people. So I created a very simple template inside of Excel, similar to the Dynamics add-in. But the difference here, this is all a table. So you got to make sure to format that as an Excel table. And you'll see why we need to do that in Power Automate here in a few minutes. And then I created some folders. So I've got my journal entry folder in OneDrive. I've got a folder for the success imported spreadsheets as well as the rejected. And then we start by setting up our Power Automate. So let's go ahead and jump into Power Automate again. And I've got a few tabs up here. And so you can see here, got this open. I'm going to give you some tips on building this out. So the other thing I need to do is go find my Excel spreadsheet. So let me go ahead and open up my Excel spreadsheet on another screen. So here's my Excel spreadsheet. And again, just the key here is making sure this section is all formatted as a table. And so what I'm going to do with this spreadsheet is it's actually going to end up in OneDrive in this folder here. So you simply drag and drop it into this folder. I don't want to do it yet because that'll kick off my Power Automate. So let's look at my Power Automate first. So the trigger in this one is when a file is created in that journal entry folder, start running. So it's just watching that folder for whenever a new spreadsheet is dropped in there. And then it gets the information about the spreadsheet. It creates a OneDrive shared link so people can look at the spreadsheet. And then this step, this start approval, let me minimize these to bring that up on the screen. This wait for approval, this is a standard Power Automate component. So I can have different approval types. In this case, I'm just doing a first person to respond, but you could have multiple people. I've hard coded this so it goes to a certain user for approval. And then I can put in the details and give them a link to get to the spreadsheet. So that's kind of what I filled out in here. And then based on their approval, we get two branches. So we have a condition. If the outcome's to approve, go down the yes side. If it's not to approve, go down the no side. Now, you could do the no a lot different than I have. I'm actually moving that file into a different location and then sending an email back to the user to say, hey, your file was rejected and it's been moved here. And I give them the web link for that. You might leave it where it's at. You might delete the file. All of those are options. So if you look at add an option here, OneDrive. So if I look at OneDrive for Business, you'll notice I can create other files. I can get a list, but I can convert the file. I can copy the file. I can delete the file. So any of these options could be used. So again, I'm hoping this session just kind of gets your brain spinning of all the different things you might possibly do. But let's don't concentrate on rejecting their file. Let's talk about if they actually approve the file. So if they approve the file, I need Power Automate to read it because it needs to know what it's going to put into D365. So that's where I can use the Excel connector. And the Excel connector, I tell it to go out into that OneDrive location and get that file that we dropped earlier. So that's why I use the file identifier. I don't want to hard code a name there because I may name the spreadsheet different each time. And then I do hard code the table name because it's a little harder to get that dynamically. So I make sure the template, it's always called journal. Now I start by creating a ledger header. And again, I hard code these to come into my general journal, but they could come into a different journal if you wanted to. You could even automate the posting. I don't do that yet, but you certainly could. And then the other key thing we need to look out for is you got to make sure things are in the right format. So I have to do, and all this is documented in the PowerPoint, you have to change this to the float format. So you're able to do some real small coding. I mean, it's really just a matter of float the field from the spreadsheet is really all you're doing here. So again, my background, I'm an accountant by trade. So I'm able to write all this code per se. This is a low code environment. So if I can write it, I'm sure all of you guys can do it as well. And then once I do that, I just simply have to map in my spreadsheet information. Okay, so you can see I start mapping in my account number goes into the account column, my account type goes into the account type, my credit, my debit. Now, one thing I do recommend, I haven't talked about earlier, is you can start renaming some of these so it's easier to find. So you notice how I have compose whole debit amount. So think of that. Whoops, I didn't mean to right mouse click. Think of that as some comments inside of your code. So I can rename this, or I can add a comment. So if somebody else comes back to look at my flow later, they're able to see what's taking place. So finally, after I bring in everything to D365, I have a delay in here. So I talked about a delay in that vendor option. I have a delay in there because once Power Automate starts reading the file, OneDrive keeps the file locked for a little bit of time. That's currently something Microsoft's working on resolving, but the fix right now is the delay. So I delay for about 10 minutes before I then move that file to the submitted, and then I send an email out to the user that actually sent this. So if this is all correct, we're going to go ahead and just drop that spreadsheet into this OneDrive. And so I'm going to actually open up Outlook for that user. Actually, I may be able to do it in Teams. Yeah, I think I can do it in Teams. I should get their approval here. So we'll see, it takes a minute for this to start running. So it is running. So we'll see that has kicked off. And when you first start testing these, I like to come in here and kind of watch it. So you get the green check mark. These are tested. So now it's waiting for an approval. And sure enough, I don't know if you heard it there, it just popped up and said, Dan sent you a request. So now I can see that spreadsheet that I got uploaded is pending my approval. So this is where I can approve or reject. So I could do it in Teams. I also got an email for it, so I could do it in email as well. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and approve it here in Teams. And it just lets me know. And sure enough, I come back to the Power Automate and look at that. It's starting to run. It's coming down the yes side. It's created a record. It's applying each, so it's putting in the lines. We'll give it a couple seconds to do that. And then we should be able to go back into Dynamics and see, yeah, it has finished that. So I'm just going to go back over here into my journal entries, and we'll see it's actually this last journal entry that was just brought into the system. Should have put some special notes on it so you knew that was it, but that is the journal entry that was just brought into the system. So with that, let me go back to PowerPoint. And again, all of this information, I'm going to jump through a bunch of slides here. This is what we just talked about with that approval process. You know, going through the header, there's converting the debit and the credit amount. So all of this is documented in this PowerPoint for you to follow along and hopefully get some ideas. I've done this for sales orders. I've done this for purchase orders, things like that. So now, again, if you haven't entered your questions, now's the time into the chat window. Please enter your questions. And I'll finish on this last slide. This is my contact information, QR code there. If you scan that, it'll take you right to my LinkedIn, as well as some information on my blog there, danscorner.info. And I actually have examples for all these Power Automates that we've just done there. So you can actually download a Word document if you want and go through the instructions. Again, those talk about the FinOps connector versus dataverse. But look for a new blog coming for me talking about the virtual entities and how to use that. So again, I just want to thank DynamicsCon for the opportunity to present today. And hopefully you guys get a lot of information out of the sessions that are being offered. Start using Power Automate, and look forward to talking to y'all again soon. Have a great day. Well, hello everybody. Looks like we're live, and looks like we've been having some good dialogue here. So again, thanks everybody for joining the session today. Great to see everybody. Been answering a few of the questions, but trying to save some of them here for the Q&A. Just again, like to thank DynamicsCon for the opportunity to present. Hope everybody's learning a lot as they go through this. So just been scrolling through the list, and I've gathered a few of the questions. Hopefully I'm going to hit on all of them, but if you do have any more questions, I'm still scrolling through, so be sure to add those to the list. One of the first questions I've seen there is, I think Santosh asked, do I need dual write if I'm going to use that dataverse connector? You certainly could use the dataverse connector with dual write. I tend to go to the virtual entities. So with the virtual entities, you have to turn them on and deploy them. They're not all automatically turned on, but once you turn on the customer entity or the vendor entity, then you can use those, and it doesn't require dual write. It works across all your legal entities, all of that. So that's nice. And then there were some questions also along that dataverse connector. I think Philip and Ryan were both asking around the alerts. And I think Philip wanted to know if it was possible to move that business alert between different Dynamics environments. That's something I've never actually really looked into, because I can create a new alert so quickly. If I need to put it in my production or a sandbox, I just create a new one. But I'm also starting to move away from using those alerts, because if you use the dataverse, and I think this was Ryan's question, I don't need the alert, because the dataverse connector can actually trigger based on a record being added to that entity. So it doesn't need an alert to trigger it. It just goes with the record being added. There was also a question I think Nina was asking about Microsoft Documents on this. There's all kinds of information on Power Automate. I'm pulling together a lot of different pieces to do this. So there's some Microsoft Documents on just Power Automate with D365 F&O, as well as just all the other connectors, because there's several hundred connectors. And that kind of goes to, I think, Bobby's question at the beginning is, how do I see people using Power Automate? Well, unfortunately, I see people forgetting Power Automate's there. And only certain customers or even certain consultants on our team even remember they can use that. So it's just really thinking about, if I do something repetitively, there's a good chance I can use Power Automate to improve that. So if I, in my example here, we were making changes inside of D365 with a lot of things, but we were sending emails, things like that. So automating that, I can automate connecting between systems. So that's a good way to use it. So you just need to look at those connectors. If you have external systems, there may be a connector to bring that data in to D365. So it's just really looking at, what do I do repetitively, and seeing, is there a way I can do this? And really that's where I've run into this, is I get challenged by clients going, hey, we need to do this task. And then I'll, the Power Platform is the first place I look in a lot of cases, and I can do a lot of that with Power Automate or Power Apps, and as we move through. And then Mark was asking a question. I'd asked for a little more detail, but I think I understand what he's asking for about joins and working with multiple entities. And you can certainly do that. I do have many Power Automates where I do the lookup in one entity, like the customer entity, and then I use information that I got from that customer entity to maybe go to the address entity or to the sales order entity or something like that. So Dataverse and the entities already have the joins and things done. You just need to know what is the key field to go ahead and look that information up on. See, I've only got about 3 minutes left, so I want to make sure I'm hitting on everybody's questions. Let's see, a couple new ones come in. What's the difference between regular entities and virtual entities? So the regular entities are the OData connectors, and they don't tie directly to the dataverse. The virtual entities expose that same information as a virtual table inside of the dataverse. So if you look at your dataverse, you would see new tables listed like the customer V3 for the customer data entity, but it's not actually writing data back and forth. So it's all stored still in the Dynamics Finance location, not like dual write where it's written back and forth. There's not a lot of steps to set up. You have to have some understanding of Power Apps and be able to get in as an administrator to enable those entities. So there's there is some information on the docs side on how to turn those on, but you pick and choose which entities get turned on as virtual entities. Really not hard, just takes a little bit of time. And when I say that, less than 30 minutes to get most of that turned on. So I think I have hit on all of the questions. Let me just scroll through here. Again, I appreciate the comments on here. I'm glad looks like people enjoyed the presentation. Oh, Bobby's asking, can I define the channels that the notifications are sent? Some of that is driven by the approval component inside of Power Automate. So it depends if, like in Teams, if they have the approval function turned on in Teams, it kind of appears in Teams automatically. You can do more in Teams to like drive it to a certain team or a certain channel with the Teams connector. But you do have some control on that. It just depends how things are deployed in your business arrangement. So let's see, let's take one last look through here. Again, thanks everybody for the comments. I'm glad people enjoyed this. Big thing, get in and play with it. I learned a lot of this from the School of Hard Knocks, and Google is your friend, or Bing, we're on Microsoft. So there's a lot of community information out there. So if you run into an error, start going out there and just searching it. And I'll guarantee you somebody else has ran into that same error and has probably put an article or a comment or something out there, and you can take that and get past your error that you're running into. So take advantage of the power of Power Automate, take advantage of everything here in the Dynamics Con session. Hope to see all you guys maybe at the live event here in September. Looking forward to getting back and seeing everybody again. Thanks, Dynamics Con. Thanks for attending, and look to talk to everybody soon. Have a great day.